At an exchange with the country's political and military head command, Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro Moros confirmed having held a meeting with an official delegation sent by the United States government. The Russian Defense Ministry confirmed the opening of humanitarian corridors for the evacuation of civilians from Kiev and 4 other Ukrainian cities. China held the second plenary of the 5th session of the 13th National People's Congress. Hello, welcome to From the South. My name is Gladys Marlenis Quesada Cruz. I'm your anchor from teleSUR studios in Caracas, Venezuela. We begin with the news. Stay with us. And now we begin. At an exchange with the country's political and military high command, Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro Moros confirmed having held a meeting with an official delegation sent by the United States government. Maduro gave details about the meeting held last Saturday with an official delegation sent by Washington. Speaking from the Miraflores presidential palace, the Venezuelan president said that the meeting had taken place in a very diplomatic, respectful and cordial atmosphere, and that they had discussed issues of common interest in order to draw on an agenda for the future.
We had a meeting. I could describe it as respectful, cordial, very diplomatic between the delegation of the government of the United States and the thinning of the Venezuelan government that I cherish. We did it in the main presidential office, in office number 1. There were the flags of the United States and Venezuela, and the 2 united flags looked beautiful, as they should be. We had almost 2 hours talking.
Likewise, the head of the Venezuelan state, Nicolás Maduro, affirmed that a worker agenda on the welfare of the peoples of Americas and the Caribbean has been agreed with the state delegation.
We have agreed to work on a forward agenda, issues of interest. I thought it was very important to talk face-to-face with topics of the utmost interest of Venezuela and the world, from respect and from the maximum hope of a better world. We can advance in an agenda that allows the peace and peace of the peoples of our hemisphere, of our region, of Latin America and the Caribbean. That's the main thing.
The White House's press secretary, Jem Psaki, has announced that official talks in Venezuela dealt with a variety of issues, including energy and security, as well as the health and welfare of detained U.S. citizens.
As it relates to Venezuela, the purpose of the trip that was taken by administration officials was to discuss a range of issues, including certainly energy security, but also to discuss the health and welfare of detained U.S. citizens. We're never going to miss an opportunity to do exactly that. And I will just note in this scenario that they are separate. They are separate paths and conversations, just as they are in the Iran negotiations.
Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro Moros announced on national television the resumption of a dialogue process with the opposition, which had been halted for 5 months.
Mexico's dialogue received a tremendous blow, as you know. But if we are asking for dialogue for the world, we have to set an example in the country. And we're going to reformat the national dialogue process. We're going towards a more inclusive, more comprehensive, broader dialogue process. We're going to an immediate reformatting and a dynamization of the international political dialogue process. I'm announcing it for the meeting of all sectors for the peace of Venezuela, for the recovery of Venezuela.
And now we move on to other topics. Argentinian Minister of Economy, Martín Guzmán, and the Chief of Staff, Juan Manzur, presented the pre-agreement to be endorsed by the National Congress to refinance Argentina's debt with the International Monetary Fund for some $45 billion as parliamentary debate on the deal began.
This is a program that we consider to be meant for recovery and a program to reduce inflation, and therefore we want to comply it, and our commitment is to effectively achieve it. The support of a National Congress will be decisive to act in a way that strengthens our republic and strengthens us as a republic. It will strengthen us as a nation state, and we will be able to stand up as a stronger nation state in the world. This is our task and our responsibility to avoid, through dialogue, discussion, and constructive contribution, a scenario of generalized default for Argentina.
On Tuesday, March the 8th, countries around the world commemorate International Women's Day, a day that highlights the political, socio-economic, and cultural achievements of women. The celebration is linked to the first women's demonstrations that took place at the beginning of the 20th century, mainly in the United States, in which they sought to obtain the right to vote and to improve their working conditions. One of the major incidents that highlighted the unfavorable conditions under which women worked at the time was when a shirt factory in New York caught fire on 25 March 1911, claiming the lives of 123 women and 23 men. In Bolivia, women's groups hold activities to commemorate International Women's Day. The mobilized citizens gathered this Tuesday from early hours in the Murillo Square, located in the center of the city of La Paz. In the framework of the date, they demand justice and denounce the delay in the outcome of the criminal proceedings of those who have been sentenced for rape, gender violence, or femicides and who have been released. The women called on President Luis Arce to join these mobilizations. The march was called by the collective Mujeres Creando in the framework of various acts prior to the date that took place this Monday at the Murillo Lighthouse in the city of El Alto, from where they marched to the Departmental Court of Justice of La Paz to demand justice and that there is no longer impunity for those responsible. And on Monday night, a fire was reported in Cuba at the Máximo Gómez Báez thermoelectric power plant located in the coastal municipality of Mariel. Sources from the Ministry of Energy and Mines confirmed to local media that the incident occurred in Unit Number 7 of the facility. It was also reported that the fire brigade is mobilized throughout the province to minimize the damage in the shortest possible time. Although the fire is of large proportions, the ministry certified that no casualties were reported and that the incident did not affect the electricity service. We'll take a short break now. Join us again after this. Welcome back to From the South. More news now. The Russian Defense Ministry confirmed on Tuesday the opening of humanitarian corridors for the evacuation of civilians from Kiev and 4 other Ukrainian cities. Major General Igor Konashenkov reported that from 10 o'clock Moscow time, a regime of silence is declared and humanitarian corridors are established for the safe evacuation of civilians from Kiev, Chernobyl, Sumy, Kharkov, and Mariupol. Ukrainian Deputy Prime Minister Irina Vereshchuk confirmed a 12-hour ceasefire in the humanitarian corridor from Sumy to Poldova. She also urged Russia to authorize and notify the International Committee of the Red Cross of the evacuation of civilians along other humanitarian corridors from Voljanova and Mariupol to Zaporizhia, as well as from Kiev and Kharkov to western Ukraine. The United States and its European allies are discussing a possible ban of Russian oil imports to tighten the economic sanctions on President Vladimir Putin over the military operation in Ukraine. Since late last week, the White House said it was looking for ways to reduce U.S. consumption of Russian oil while protecting U.S. families from price hikes, but pressure has mounted on several Western nations to cut Russian energy imports as a way to tighten the pressure on the Kremlin. U.S. sanctions could take 2 forms. The more severe option is for the U.S. not buying any Russian oil and refusing to engage with any nation that did, much as Washington approached sanctions on Iran in recent years. The softer and more likely option is to impose an embargo on Russian energy. That is, nobody in the U.S. will touch Russian oil, leaving it to the European Union to decide their own fate. And this morning, U.S. President Joe Biden has announced another set of measures to cripple Russia's economy and target the country's main exports and their main sources of income. Biden, in his announcement, advanced that as a result of Russia's aggression against Ukraine, he has decided to cut off Russia's supply of oil, gas, and energy by asserting that those products will no longer be acceptable in the U.S. ports. Likewise, he stated that Russia's largest bank has been the target of sanctions and that his country has already sent $1 billion to Ukraine in security and military assistance. The president also acknowledged that Visa, MasterCard, and American Express have already left that Eurasian nation. The U.S. president insisted on the need to become more and more energy independent, and he called on Congress to approve another $12 billion in assistance to Ukraine. And we have more on the matter. Russian authorities gave a preliminary assessment of the Russian special operation launched on 24 February and asserted that 2,482 military targets have been destroyed so far in Ukraine. Konashenkov confirmed the destruction of 87 Ukrainian command posts and communication centers, 124 air missile systems, 79 radars, 866 tanks and armored vehicles. At the same time, he noted that the troops of the self-proclaimed Lugansk People's Republic advanced 9 kilometers on Monday and took control of 8 locations. On the other hand, he indicated that units of the People's Militia of the Donetsk People's Republic established control over the Ozakiev district of Mariupol. Iran's foreign minister said that cooperation between the Islamic Republic and other countries, including Russia, must not be affected by the illegal sanctions. In a telephone conversation with the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov on Monday, Iran's chief diplomat Hossein Amir-Abdollahian stressed the need to effectively remove all the sanctions imposed on Iran. We oppose both war and the imposition of sanctions, the senior Iranian diplomat said, also saying that. It goes without saying that sanctions should not affect Iran's cooperation with any country, including Russia, he concluded. On Tuesday, the United Kingdom announced a new ban on imports of Russian oil. The United Kingdom is joining the United States in announcing a ban on imports of Russian oil. Business Secretary Kwasi Kwarteng said oil and derivatives products from Russia will be phased out by the end of the year. He said the transition period strikes a good balance between eliminating reliance on Russian oil, but also allowing people time and people in the market to adapt to the removal of Russian imports, which accounts for 8% of UK demand. Kwarteng explained the UK will work with its other oil suppliers, including the United States, the Netherlands and the Gulf states, to secure extra supplies. And we have more news coming up after a final short break, so stay with us. Welcome back to From the South. China's top legislative body opened its second plenary meeting in the presence of President Xi Jinping. The annual parliamentary session is a week-long meeting where the Asian nation's political priorities, economic expectations, and foreign policy goals are set. The plenary session was attended by the head of the state, Xi Jinping, who emphasized during his speech the need to administer the country's military forces in accordance with the law and to improve the level of promotion of the rule of law in national defense and military construction. Xi also told the assembly that the revolution, modernization, and regularization of the armed forces should be strengthened in all respects. Sudanese security forces arrested a senior opposition leader on Tuesday as officers fired tear gas to stop dozens of protesters rallying against last year's military coup. The demonstrations were the latest since an October 25th military takeover led by Army Chief Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, which was followed by a broadening crackdown on civilian and pro-democracy figures in the Northeast African nation. According to medics, at least 85 people have been killed and hundreds wounded by security forces during over 4 months of protests demanding civilian rule and justice for those killed in demonstrations. On Tuesday, security forces fired a barrage of acrid tear gas at crowds heading towards the presidential palace in the center of the capital, Khartoum, with severe people injured. Tuesday's protests coincided with International Women's Day.
With regard to women, it is very important that we, women, who have been marginalized, especially the refugees, political activists who lost sons and husbands, are struggling for this great country. On our part, we take part of the marches to feel that we have done a great thing because this is our right. Our rights are lost and we are looking for them by advocating our issues that have not been raised. We want these issues to raise. We have many issues. Our children are not receiving education and we, ourselves, are sick and tired and have no health rights and we don't have accommodation.
Now we address other topics. President Jair Bolsonaro is preparing a project known as the National Fertilizer Plan. The measure uses the Russia-Ukraine conflict as an excuse to invade indigenous lands and open those territories to mining. More details in the following report from our correspondent Ignacio Lemus.
After the impeachment of Dilma Rousseff, Petrobras closed and privatized fertilizer plants as part of its disinvestment policy. Fafen, the main producer of nitrogenates, closed in 2020 during the government of Jair Bolsonaro. In this context, Brazil imports 85% of fertilizers, out of which 23% from Russia. The fertilizer most used by agribusiness is NPK, nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. On this regard, Bolsonaro has avoided talking about the closure of nitrogen plants by focusing instead on potassium. 80% of the world's potassium reserves depend on Russia, Belarus, and Canada. This whole discussion about potassium is just to mask the mismanagement of nitrogen fertilizers. Those should be left to us to produce in the hands of Brazilians, just like in Venezuela, because we have oil and gas, so we can produce them. But in order to bypass the real issue, his incompetence in this regard, he'd rather focus on potassium. Before the conflict between Russia and Ukraine broke out, Bolsonaro, at the request of the agribusiness, asked Vladimir Putin to keep supplying fertilizers, but with the escalation of the conflict, the Russian Ministry of Industry and Trade advises companies not to export fertilizers. Faced with imminent shortages, Bolsonaro is seeking to decree a national fertilizer plan that contemplates mineral exploitation on indigenous lands, which would be unconstitutional. Bolsonaro had already been insisting on all this. Bolsonaro in 2020 sent to the National Congress his Bill 191. In that bill, he already contemplated the regularization of mining in indigenous lands. This is one of the main political proposals with which Bolsonaro becomes president of the Republic. From day one, he's been working to make this a reality in the country. In 2021 and 2022, he has asked the National Congress to make Bill 191 a priority. All this was before the Russian-Ukrainian conflict. The president claims that without fertilizers, there will be a shortage of produce. However, in 2021, agribusiness made record profits in the export of raw materials, whereas more than half of the Brazilian population did not have adequate access to food supplies. Now he's got one more excuse, a valid excuse. The Ukrainian-Russian conflict, the impact on indigenous peoples would be tragic. It would mean making the life of indigenous peoples practically unviable. According to the Ministry of Agriculture, the supply of fertilizers will last until October, but the National Adobo Association says it would only last until June. Meanwhile, the indigenous people are preparing for an escalation of attacks by the Bolsonaro administration.
Ignacio Lemus y Julian Asif para teleSUR.
And now we move on to other topics. The South Korea government declared the cities of Gangneung and Donghae as a special disaster area following the forest fire that affected the east coast of the country. The authorities made the decision to provide support to both cities in recovery efforts. Previously, the Seoul executive declared Euljeon, a city located some 330 kilometers southeast of the capital, a special disaster zone. The fire that continued for 5 days burned about 21,772 hectares of forest on the east coast, according to the Security and Disaster Countermeasures, the headquarters. So far, authorities reported no fatalities, but confirmed damage to more than than 500 facilities and homes due to the flames. More than 7,300 people were evacuated earlier in the day. And we have come to the end of this news brief. But remember, you can find this and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. And also, if you feel so inclined, please join us on social media for all the latest news. We are on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Telegram. For TeleSUR English, I'm your anchor, Gladys Quesada. Thank you for watching.